All right, time for another update on the project. Have been in many different directions and making progress on all fronts, and I'll kind of run through the gamut of what's going on. First and foremost, as you'll see here, there's a new exhaust manifold and a new turbo. After a bit of research, I decided that I wanted to run a turbo with a ball bearing cartridge for overall spool and reliability. The operative word being reliability. The factory setup, I believe, would have worked okay, especially with the retrimmed wheel. However, a journal bearing turbo, trying to run the overall pressure I'd like to run, I don't think was going to cut it for reliability. So we picked up a Borg Warner EFR turbo. So this is a 7064 trim, and I've already done a little bit to it, and you can see that here with a modified wastegate mounting bracket, and everything looks and functions as I believe it should. So this is quite the turbo, and I'm pretty excited about what this thing is going to offer the build. The other nice and exciting feature is also this new turbo manifold. And this is not just any turbo manifold, this is something quite special. This is an inconel turbo manifold with an anti-lag system. So these pipes feed in fresh air, and it'll come off the turbo's charge pipe, and they'll have kind of like a wastegate style poppet valve, and it will supply fresh air to the exhaust. So with, of course, aftermarket engine management, you run the engine a little bit rich, and combustion will actually take place in the exhaust manifold, promoting spool whenever you whenever you need, more precisely. So this is a used manifold. It came off a rally car, if you can believe that. Let's see if I can find in here. Toyota Corolla, WRC. Let's see, it looks like it's September of '98 possibly, but in either case, this thing is pretty rare, and quite excited that I was able to find one of these. So a little bit of work in order to make this thing work, and you can see here that work is still underway. So this is a 3D printed part, but it is of my own design, and it's an adapter. So the plan will be refine everything now in the 3D prints, since it's relatively affordable, and then once everything is fit and finished like I'd like, I will go ahead and have that part milled out. And it'll probably be maybe just mild steel or maybe some stainless. I don't know yet, but we'll figure it out. But so far this mocks up into the engine bay and fits ever so snug, and it's not something I'm looking forward to putting in, but once it's there, it's there, and there's just enough clearance. So that's an exciting new bit of the project. The other parts that are kind of new are these motor mounts. So these are actually the factory mounts, and I ended up casting my own urethane or polyurethane bushings. So it's about an 80A durometer, and they're solid fill, so these things are also split in half, and that should keep things serviceable. And I have molds for everything, so if I ever wanted to go up or down in the overall durometer, I could just cast a new set and pop them in, and away I go. So a little bit of flexibility in regards to that whole setup. So this is kind of the current state of the engine. There's still a long ways to go. The other issue that I'm going to have, unfortunately, is this whole setup hangs so low. The shifter cables actually are going to foul out on the turbo housing itself. So I'm trying to figure out how I want to go about modifying that. So I picked up a bracket from Hux Racing and mocked it up that way, and the turbo bracket would, or not, pardon, not the turbo bracket, but the shifter bracket would actually stick up here, and of course that's not going to really work, trying to shift right in essentially the compressor housing itself. So I've taken and modified the shifter brackets, which I'll go kind of find right now. So let's see if I can crawl under here. All right, so a little bit cramped in here, but maybe everyone can see. So these are new cables, and let's see. So here's the current configuration. So you can see these brackets here are part of the Hux Racing assembly, and I've already kind of cut and modified everything so it fits a little bit closer to the slave cylinder, but it's not quite close enough. And then let's see if I can get the angle just right here. You can see this lower one, it kind of bows out and over, and unfortunately that's yielding to some binding, and that specifically is going to be for the first and second. So if this is, let's see if I can actually engage this. Probably help if I'm actually in neutral. No, maybe, maybe not. That's neutral. No, I'm not going to be able to do it by hand right now. But you can see this is the actual neutral position between gates 3 and 4. So if this was over towards gates 1 and 2, it's actually going to cam over further, and it's unfortunately yielding a very terrible feel in the shift between first and second. Given those ones are pretty important, that's not going to really cut it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to probably modify this whole bracket again, move everything closer to the transmission and maybe a little bit further down. And I'll probably end up having to modify this bracket here and possibly redo this one, but I don't know just yet. So overall, we have progress on the rest of the mounts. So I cut this partially out and ended up re-welding it to the chassis. Not quite finished, but mostly there, and positions the engine correctly now, which is the important bit. Blew out a hole, unfortunately, in the past, so I'll have to weld that back up. But all of the mounts, with the exception of this part, I think we're about there. So everything else so far has been painted, and same thing, cast polyurethane bushings on everything else. A little bit more difficult to see there, but everything is pretty much the same durometer, same overall design. All right. Get out from underneath the car. So suspension, been making progress on it. Not quite viable just yet, but not too far. All right, let's see. Grab a light. So you can see the second gen coils and suspension. Everything is in, and apologies in advance for rotating the camera, but I figure better to see it this way. All right, so the whole second gen knuckles are in. The last outstanding item is really the toe control arm. So you can see, let's see. So normally you'd have the control arm link up to here, and this whole assembly is much closer to the main hub and bearing assembly, but in the second gen, it's kind of extended out on this long arm. So the reality of the situation would be to run a very, very short control arm, and that's not going to cut it. The bump steer is not going to be ideal at all. So here is a 93 aftermarket control arm for the second gen MR2, and just bolting it up, it's about center line of the car. So I've got kind of two options here, and that is to either remake this from scratch, which I may do, or I'll join the two subframes together and have a mounting point over here for both those toe control links. Or I'll do another control or subframe, pardon, here, and actually just have those bolt to the chassis directly. So I don't know exactly which direction I'm going to go just yet, but I think the easiest path is maybe weld on some captive nuts onto a fresh plate here, and then just have those control arms bolt up to the main chassis. I think it's going to be a strong enough member, especially if I reinforce it with another plate. And then all I have to do is really cut out this assembly in order to give room for the arm. So I think that's the direction I'm going to go, but we will see. Let's see. So the last updates with regards to the suspension overall, running the second gen knuckles or hubs, I guess knuckles is the proper term. It moves everything a little bit closer to the chassis, so the clearance between here and the main frame here is too close for comfort. At full droop it does touch, which is not going to fly. Much less, I'm pretty much maxed out going positive camber on this, which is not desirable. So the answer is going to be I'll have to cut this probably a couple inches out of it. I'll grind this thing off, reposition it further, and have plenty of clearance. It'll be a tight fit, but it'll fit. And I think with that, I'll have a perfectly viable second gen MR2 suspension setup on the car. And I'm pretty pleased with how this thing's shaping up. Still work left to go, but you know, what isn't work these days? Especially trying something like this. The overall plan will be to actually run some measurements and see about getting the bump steer something that's acceptable. So there's still more engineering to go verify the whole setup, but as it stands, I think it's viable. I think it's possible. Pardon the mess here, but the front's looking pretty good. I just have to assemble the sway bar assembly, but I think for fitment, considering there's no brakes, it's kind of a tight fit, and I'll probably end up having to run the wheel arches after all. But yeah, I think that's perfectly acceptable, especially with what's kind of planned for the car. So that's the overall status of the project. Making progress on things slowly but surely. A lot more fabrication and trial and error with that shifter assembly. I'll need to kind of wrap up the shift mounts a little bit more. I have some more reinforcements to do to make sure things are going to be reliable in the long run. But progress is progress, and that's kind of where things currently stand. I still need to get that whole transmission split open and install that differential. Yeah, one day. Perhaps once I finish up everything else. Kind of be the last step before final assembly. All right, I think that's pretty much it. Well, thanks for following along. Still can't believe this thing. That is going to be quite exciting. Very much looking forward to getting this thing going.